Something I noticed recently is really just another example of how easy it is to not notice something when you're in the throes of it. If it's a life moment, not realizing how hard something actually is, or the depths that you have to go for a certain thing, just because it's normal, it's the habit. However one's gotten to that point, it's the frog boiling. It's slow enough, the change is seemingly built upon another and upon another and upon another, and before you realize it, you're in something that you actually despise, but the momentum of it just keeps you going. It could also just be a way of thinking. Used to doing something for so long or introduced to it in a certain way, you don't realize that it's actually nonsensical. Or that there's a whole other field of view that you just had no idea about. If it's the cuisine, food you're used to eating, then all of a sudden you try something from some other place and you realize, oh my God, there's a depth of flavor I just had no idea about. The same thing also goes to ideas. One of the ideas that's pervasive today, and the one that led me to ponder this whole thing in the first place, and it's one I don't think we really even notice about. Our attention isn't called to it. And it's one that doesn't really have a name for it. So our attention hasn't been called to it as a single thing. At least, not as far as I can tell. And that is in our seemingly never-stopping advancement of a different way of life that, of course, technology brings. If it's the packaging of foodstuffs, to be able to have anything you want on demand, seemingly never having to cook for yourself, in a kind of archaic form of some machine from Star Trek that with a single code or a voice command can make you anything you want. It's in this technological, we can do absolutely anything, that we forget how much more there is still left to discover. That if we were to be in a single place for decades upon decades, there's probably so much more about that location than we ever could have possibly imagined. If that's in the middle of the blazing Sahara Desert, a forest in the Midwest, the Amazon jungle, a seeming spot of the ocean in the middle of nowhere, thousands of miles from anyone else with a human pulse. And the way of thinking that's so encompassing that most of us don't even realize it is the idea that we can reduce everything down. We can understand the chain of events that happen and recreate it, or at least understand how it's happened and created in whatever setting it's in. The so-called reductionist view of science. And while that is stunningly useful, making you all understand the world around us, and just kind of like naming an idea or a concept or a thing starts to make us think we have it all understood. It leads us to have a false understanding of what actually is there, what else is to understand. Plant life needs nitrogen. It needs it in order to grow. It can't do it itself. Well, that might not be true. At least not for all of them. But it was up until a certain point. Humans are the only species that have culture. Yeah, that's actually wrong too. The you can do anything mindset of science and technology and so-called, quote, progress is true. But as I see most, if not all, truths, the paradox is that's not everything. You can't reduce everything. You can't do everything. And just as there is amazing ways to do new things we never thought possible by trying things out and experimenting, there's also new ways to discover what is possible from just focusing on the same things or simply observing. Studying a single species year over year over year may lead to decades of absolutely nothing being found. But progress isn't steady, it's not linear, it's explosive. There may be a moment or 6 months or a year where you learn more than the whole decade or decades before. I think technology is cool. It's interesting what we can accomplish. I take advantage of it all the time. I'm recording this on an iPhone in a beautiful, stunning forest which wouldn't have been possible many years before. And even when I was a child, it would have been possible, but it would have required me having extra equipment, not also having to be able to take one thing that has a camera on it better than any camera I had as a child, doesn't need film, can also record video, can make a phone call, connect to the internet, which wasn't a thing, based not in the way that it is now when I was a kid. And that wasn't that long ago. Technology is cool. It's also cruel. Makes things too easy for us. But that's a whole other thing. What it also leads us to is to not think there's all that much left to observe. The only things that are left are to create. When I think those are two heads of the same coin, to observe and to create. Observing is passive, sure, but it's actually active passivity. You're actively paying attention. And creating, you're actively noticing. But you're actually noticing what you're doing, how you're interacting. So many of our solutions these days are for us to add something. We're fucking up the environment by adding too many things. Oh, let's add some other things to balance it out. And perhaps what we really need to do is foster an environment, foster a culture, foster the actual terrain, the terra firma, the solid ground around us, to help itself. We get there through observing and then taking action, just like any other major scientific advancement. Einstein observing in his thoughts how a train works, leading to deep understandings of time and its relationship with gravity. Newton with an apple before him. So I guess really what I'm saying, like most other true things, is that there's nothing new from what I'm saying. We observe and then we create. I do worry, though, in the seemingly endless stream of information coming to us, if we don't get dulled into not observing at all. The next two episodes are about advancements that are being made by simply observing, and the depth of what else there is to discover that's resulted from noticing it in the first place. One of my favorite pithy Socrates lines is when he's asked, "What is wisdom?" And his response is, "All I know is that I know nothing." One of the ways in which I interpret that is the more I learn, the more I understand how little I know. In the time where knowledge, so much knowledge, is available at any moment, we seem to forget that wisdom is almost never long, and it usually comes from observation, even if it's observing our own experience. I'm going to go back to observing this beautiful forest around me. I hope this finds you wherever you are in our beautiful blue dot, well and on the path to thriving. And if you're there already, I'm trying to catch up to you. Take care. If you like what you're hearing, please follow the show on whatever platform you're hearing it through. And if you would, give us a rating as well, as both of those help keep the show going and get it found. One last thing. If you want to submit a topic for me to cover, throw me a person you want me to interview or talk with, even if you want to talk with me, or you just want to tell me how terrible of a job I did on something, check out Bandwidth Productions to visit the site and drop us a note.